So good afternoon, everyone. I am responsible for the Inquiring Minds monthly series under the auspices of Toronto Mensa. I warmly welcome you to this Zoom edition of Toronto Mensa Inquiring Minds. My name is Kathleen Smith. It is my pleasure to introduce today's speaker. Felicia Davis has a bachelor's degree in economics and a master's degree in organizational management. As an adult, she was diagnosed with autism, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, and a genius level IQ. Felicia has used her intelligence to figure out how her ways of thinking are different from people's usual ways of thinking. This gives her an edge because she has used these insights to develop communication skills. Felicia uses those skills to coach other neurodiverse individuals, and she has turned her skill into a superpower within the business world, leading to her rapid success professionally and personally. She has moved up the corporate ladder, doubling her salary along the way. Within Mensa, Felicia is one of the administrators for the Autistic group on Facebook, and she is her local Mensa chapter president in Fort Worth, Texas. In today's talk, Felicia is going to tell us what neurodiversity encompasses. She will explain how diversity is different in females than in males. And she will share her knowledge about what resources are available to autistic people in different countries. She has chosen the title Neurodiversity Around the World: Respect, Responsibility, and Resilience. Welcome, Felicia Davis.
Thank you very much, Kathleen, and thank you everybody who's online attending. I'll say good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I know you are from all over the world, which makes me very excited. And for those of you who woke up really early, I'm very honored. So to get started, because I know we have a short amount of time, but I'd like to cover as much as we possibly can. And Kathleen, you gave a wonderful introduction, but I'll go ahead and add, sometimes it can be helpful to actually see things written out. There is a QR code on your screen. You do not have to use that. It just takes you to my LinkedIn tree. And I do have a website, Felicia M.L Davis, if you guys would like that. Just some quick background. So I've been doing leadership for over 15 years. I'm finishing up a book that'll be published early next year, and a public speaker. I do neurodiversity training, and Kathleen has already covered most of these other things. I am a registered stockbroker, web developer. I do have 2 children who are 6 and 8, and I am very active in my local Mensa group. So like most people, I am a huge polymath and in Mensa. So to get started on our topic today, what is diversity? And I realized we said we're talking about neurodiversity, but first we really need to lay the groundwork. So diversity is an instance of being composed of different elements or qualities. So when we think of diversity around the world, it can be anything from age, race, sexual orientation, beliefs, opinions, your social economic background, orientations, values. All of those are things that make us diverse. All of those are things that are really important. So we're going to hone in on one very specific piece of diversity today. We're going to be talking about what is neurodiversity. So neurodiversity is the range of differences in individual brain function and behavioral traits as part of normal variation in the human population. This was coined by Judy Singer, who's an Australian sociologist. Now, it's very important that you recognize this is not a medical term. This is used to promote equality and inclusion of neurological minorities. The reason I'm saying this is not a medical term, which means if you look in books like, for example, in America, we have a book called the DSM-5, which is the Diagnostician's Manual that helps define what autism is, what a lot of varying neurological diagnoses are. You will not find a cohesive list of what falls under neurodiversity because it is a social term. So with that, some of the things that fall under neurodiversity are things like dyscalculia, dyslexia, ADHD, autism, Tourette's syndrome. It's a very large group, anything that causes a normal variation in the human brain. As Kathleen had pointed out at the beginning, I have both autism and ADHD. We call these co-occurring diagnoses, which means I have more than one thing that makes me a little different than everybody else. Assuming most of you on here are Mensons, that already puts you 2 standard deviations above everybody else. If you have any of these, that puts you further off into a new category. When you have something like co-occurring, where you have 2 or more different diagnoses, that further makes you different than everybody else. But different is good and has its value. So for example, if you look at, we'll focus on ADHD and autism. So autism, it's a concentration. We tend to have strong concentration, fine detail processing, and a good memory. We tend to be very honest, but we also have a lot of sensory awareness. Sensory awareness would be things like the number of articles that are touching your skin. Now, if we move over to ADHD, we tend to be very authentic, hyper-focused, lots of energy, and passionate and creative. When you have 2 things that potentially can conflict with each other, it can make it a little interesting during the day, but it does add a lot of variety to life. So what is autism? I'm probably going to focus on this one a little bit more than everything else. It probably gets the most publicity, but I think it's also largely misunderstood. So autism, or ASD, which stands for Autism Spectrum Disorder, is a group of developmental disorders marked by impairments in the ability to communicate and interact socially by the presence of repetitive behaviors or restricted interests. You'll notice I also put in that this used to qualify for Asperger's syndrome. So some of you on this call may have gotten a diagnosis of Asperger's syndrome. I will tell you that it's still a very valid diagnosis. And while it does fall under autism, if any individual identifies as saying that they have Asperger's, please do not correct them that they are wrong. They are correct. It's just they have since learned that it is a large spectrum. And so people have varying different symptoms. So when we think of diversity, let's go over what some normal diversity is. Now, these 2 figures may be more common in the US, but Shaquille O'Neal is a famous basketball player here in the US, and he's 7 foot 1 inches or 216 centimeters tall. Simone Biles is a world-class Olympic gymnast. She's 4 feet 8 inches or 142 centimeters. These are considered normal diversity. This is just part of their genetics that they are extremely different in their height. Both of them figured out how to capitalize on that and have done really well in their respective fields. Now, whether you know who either of these 2 people are doesn't particularly matter, but picture for a moment that we took Shaquille and we told him, I want you to become a world-class gymnast. Might be a little comical. He could probably do some form of gymnastics, but there's no way he would ever make an Olympic team, let alone win Olympic gold medals. By the same token, Simone Biles, I don't even think, no matter how hard she tried, I don't know that she could ever dunk a basketball. Probably not. If we judged her for that, she would fail. But instead, when you focus on what you're good at, you can do really well. And I don't know why the picture is missing from this. There should be a picture of Sultan Kozan, and I'm probably not saying the name correctly, but you can look him up. He's the tallest living man in the world. However, unlike Shaq and Simone, he actually has a medical condition that causes gigantism. He was teased as a child and suffers pain in his legs, for which his family was unable to afford proper treatment. In 2009, the 26-year-old gentle giant noted that he was extremely lonely because of this condition. He did actually get treatment that stopped the pituitary gland from continuing to cause him to grow, so he will not grow beyond 251 centimeters. But it did cause a lot of problems in his life. So just because somebody is different from the norm doesn't mean that they're going to become world famous. Sometimes there's struggles that go with that. So I'd kind of alluded to this on a previous slide. And I'm going to ask you, you don't have to type it in chat, but just think about it for a second. Do you know how many things are touching your skin right now? Some of you may know the answer off the top of your head. Those of you who do might be neurodiverse. So if we follow the rule of seven, also called Miller's Law, most people remember 7 plus or minus 2 items affecting how information is processed and retained. So if you think of eyewitness statements, if there's a situation, whether we have the local authorities come out, or maybe you're a parent or a teacher and you're trying to ascertain what happened, and you ask everybody, tell me what happened, and you're going to get a story from this person, another person, another person. They're all going to have slightly different details. It's not because any one person is lying, while that could be true. Most of the time, it's that each person remembered something different because you can't remember all the information that's hitting your brain. As you're growing up, your brain will make tons and tons of connections. Children do this naturally, but your brain also realizes this isn't very efficient. And there comes a point where I can't sit here and remember how many different light sources there are in the room. I can't remember all the different types of fabric touching my skin. I can't tell you every time the refrigerator turns on or the air conditioner turns on or the temperature changes by a few degrees. That's too much to process. So your brain starts to pare it down and makes it more efficient. People who are neurodiverse, not everyone, but a lot of people like myself, lack that natural filter that says these are the 7 things you should focus on. I want you to focus on these 7 or 9 things. The rest are irrelevant, which means I have to consciously decide I'm going to ignore the air conditioner that's running. I'm going to ignore multiple different light sources. I have to tell myself, ignore the buzzing of my laptop fan right now. It's aggravating. I know it's there. I can't ignore it. I have to tell myself to ignore it. Your brain probably doesn't even recognize how many things are happening in your own environment right now. So, again, just something to be mindful of. Those of us who have a higher IQ have the additional mental capacity to do that. Individuals on the spectrum who have a lower IQ don't have the extra brain power to filter that out. That's why you'll see a lot of children and sometimes even adults that will be wearing large headphones to block out noise. They might have baseball caps or large hats on to help filter out some of the light. You may have seen there's different earbuds that you can wear that'll help block out some of the ambient noise because it's one less thing for them to have to try to process. So as we're talking about sensory experiences, and I realize this may be kind of small depending on what screen you're on, there's a lot of different things that an individual who has autism, or again, other various forms of neurodiversity may experience. And so it can be things like a higher noticing of how your body reacts to things. So lots of people with autism do not prefer, can only tolerate certain types of food because there's different textures, smells, colors. For example, I surprise most people that I do not like ice cream. Now I love gelato. If you actually go into the science behind it, ice cream has very sharp, gritty ice textures, and I don't like them. Those ice crystals are too big for me. I find it very displeasing. So I avoid it. Now, if you have good gelato, which I realize I'm probably making a lot of people in Europe happy right now, um, I love gelato because it's a much creamier texture and it gets rid of those ice crystals that I can't stand. And that's just one example, but it makes me a little different than everybody else. And while you can laugh at that and say, well, that's a pretty minor thing, it can be a challenge when people are surprised that I don't want ice cream. And there's so many more things that fall under that category, whether it's things that are touching my skin. You know, if I'm offered to go to an event and we need you to wear this specific uniform at work, I may struggle with that because it has a different fabric that I might not be able to handle very well. So these are all challenges that I have to work to come past. But there's also things that whether you're in a work environment or a school environment, just being mindful that somebody else might be putting a lot more effort in to do something that your brain automatically processes. So autism diagnoses are on the rise. A lot of neurodiverse cases are on the rise as well, but I figured I'd concentrate to just one thing since we have a short presentation. So globally, estimates suggest an increase of more than double from 0.6% in 2003 to less than 20 years later, we're at 1.25%. In the US, for example, the CDC, which is the Center for Disease Control, reported a prevalence of 1 in 36 children, and that was 5 years ago, which is significantly higher than the 1 in 50 that it reported just 20 years prior. So a question that comes up a lot is, why are these diagnoses increasing? Do we have an epidemic happening with autism and neurodiversity? One of the reasons it's rising is because girls and women experience and exhibit autism differently than most boys and men. So for every 4 boys, only 1 girl is diagnosed with autism. This often occurs due to the tendency of girls to camouflage symptoms that may appear more prominent in boys. Now, I was not able to find research on this across other countries. I don't know if that's just because I don't have access to it, or it might not be as researched as much as it is in the US today. But a lot of these, I would venture, are true just from some of the individuals I know who live in other countries, that we exhibit very similar behaviors. So girls and women tend to engage more in imaginative play, and we have a more advanced vocabulary. Typically, children who get diagnosed with autism are more introverted. I'm not. I'm an extrovert. I talk a lot. And they may have a more limited vocabulary. So that's one of the things they're looking for when they diagnose autism. Boys tend to have limited social interaction skills or understanding and sharing of facial expressions. While I also still struggle with that, I'm much better at mimicking and copying those expressions compared to my male counterparts. Now, why this is, we don't fully understand, but we do know that there's enough out there that is showing that girls and women need to have a slightly different set of criteria that you're looking for. Girls also tend to have more interest in things that are considered more social normal, even though they're a hyper focus. So while boys tend to focus on trains, planes, and some dinosaurs, girls might focus more on celebrities or maybe horses or something. Again, it's not something that signals immediately that there's a problem. Now, that said, I absolutely was obsessed with trains as a kid, so I won't say that this is universal across, but these are just some examples. So, could autism be a cultural or learned behavior? This is a question I get a lot, but I have to say, all of you are part of why I love getting this question. I talk to people who have autism around the world, from India and France and Switzerland to Canada, obviously, many people in America and many other countries. And I can tell you, it is definitely not a learned behavior because all of us struggle with the same things and our cultures could not be further from each other. But don't just take my word for it. Autism spectrums. Remember, we talked about this being a neurological variance, right? The brain either, remember when I was talking about the children making those neurological connections in the beginning? There's multiple different studies, and the brain either fails to remove connections or removes too many, resulting in similar social deficits. So the first one I realized, this is from 2013. There were actually studies way before 2013 that talked about underconnectivity. But for the purpose of this talk, I only grabbed 2 studies. So I do encourage you to continue looking and researching. And there are hundreds across the world that are studying these. But there's a hyperconnectivity study from 2013 that talked about how people who have autism have more connectivity, more connections in our brains. And so we are processing a lot more information. And that's why we get stuck, because we're doing more than the 7. Then there's the underconnectivity, where your brains get overwhelmed very quickly and they are missing and they are not able to have enough connections to actually manage all of the facial expressions and all of the social normalities that everybody else picks up intuitively. My current theory is that depending on your IQ, depends on whether you fall under the hyperconnectivity or the underconnectivity, but I have not found a study yet that confirms that. And the hardest thing when you're looking at autism studies is trying to figure out what criteria they use. So a lot of these autism studies tend to have a smaller group of people, could be 15, 20, I think 30 sometimes for the studies. And of course, I'm always looking at, how did you perform your study? What was the research criteria? Has this been peer reviewed? Also, was it done on children? Was it done on adults? Were they verbal? Were they nonverbal? Because again, it is a spectrum. And so trying to ascertain that is a little bit challenging, but this is just something to be aware of. So I want to shift a little bit for anybody on here who may be neurotypical, because I know we have a spectrum of everybody, right? Neurotypical, by the way, is anybody who is not neurodiverse. So perspective, It's just a mental view or the interrelation in which a subject or its parts are mentally viewed. All of us come with a unique perspective, whether that's because we have neurological differences in our brains. Everybody who's a Mensa knows that you have a different perspective compared to the average population. You see things and put things together that most people don't. That's probably part of why you're in Mensa, so that you can have those conversations with people that have a more similar perspective. But how do we thrive in a world where we do have unique perspectives? So, diversity, remember, that's just a difference. Diversity can reduce the potential for easy connections, requiring action to learn about variances and find ties. So, when you take two people or a group of people that seem vastly different, how do we even start to find ways that we can connect? One way I would tell you to do that is, and this is a very common phrase, at least in America, is we say, put yourself in their shoes and put yourself in their place. What would it feel like to do that? And a lot of people don't fully understand the meaning of what this phrase entails. When I say put yourself in their shoes, I don't mean if you're an extrovert and somebody's getting ready to present, I want you to imagine what it would feel like to be an extrovert presenting. Well, if you're someone like me, it's going to be exciting, it's thrilling. You might have a lot of adrenaline, feel like you're going to help a lot of people. But if you're an introvert, it's possible you could have the exact opposite feelings, or at least some of those are going to be different. And so when we say put yourself in their shoes, I don't mean put yourself in their scenario. I want you to put yourself into their personality. How do they think? How do they feel? So I'm using the example of the Myers-Briggs personality test, which I realize is not founded in science, and I won't pretend that it is. But it is helpful for establishing differences between people. So this is just for the purpose of an example. So if you look at ENTP, which is my personality type, if you go with it, which stands for extrovert, intuitive, thinking, and perceiving. We're quick-witted, audacious debaters, aren't afraid to disagree with the status quo. In fact, they're not afraid to disagree with pretty much anything or anyone, which is absolutely great unless you happen to be my mother, and I feel really bad for her that she had to raise me. I may have been very disagreeable as a child, but it was mostly in good fun. And to this day, I will still debate just for fun, but I'm also very mindful of who I'm doing it with. Now, if you take what's considered the opposite of that personality, so we take the reverse letters, ISFJ, so intuitive, sensing, feeling, and judging. In their unassuming way, understated way, defenders help the world go round. Hardworking and devoted, they feel a deep sense of responsibility to others. Now, if you can imagine an ISFJ doing the same presentation I'm doing today, because there are certainly many people who have autism who are ISFJs, according to the Myers-Briggs study or personality test. That person is going to feel very different giving this presentation than the way I do. That's not a bad thing. It's not a good thing. It's just a difference. So when you're looking for ways to connect, I want you to first put yourself in their shoes. And I want you to stop and think, what might it feel like to be them? And if you say, well, I can't imagine that because I get excited when I present because I'm an extrovert. Okay. What's something that makes you uncomfortable? Think of something that makes you uncomfortable or that is challenging. And then imagine that feeling for what you're about to do. So we look at backgrounds. Remember, our experiences contribute to our perspective. This is a little bit of a mental exercise just for you. So I've got two individuals up on the screen. And if you were to just read off very quickly and ascertain as whether it's, through an email, whether you're sitting in a meeting with them, whether it's a Mensa gathering, maybe they're just the person at your local cafe. How in the world could these two people find something in common? So on the left, we have a woman who's single, no kids. She's a software developer, a UK native, attends the Church of England, and she runs. On the right, we have a gentleman who's a widower, a father of three. He's a nurse, an immigrant to New York, Jewish, and a homeowner. Looking at this, there is no reason these two should have anything in common. What you're going to look for is the least common denominator. There's one thing I can tell you that connects everybody in the world. It's food. We might eat different things, but all of us eat. Everybody. It's why that's one of the easiest ways for us to connect, whether you're inviting somebody to sit down and eat with you, or if you offer to say, hey, let's have a chat virtually. But, maybe it's a coffee chat, maybe it's tea. It's a good place to start. All of us have those same experiences. All of us have parents. All of us went to school. They might be different, but it's a starting point. So I know we mentioned respect as part of the title of this topic. People talk a lot about awareness when it comes to diversity and neurodiversity, but I think we're past that and we're at the point of respect. But I want you to think that a lot of these things here are very invisible. So some struggles that we have are invisible, and that makes it a little harder to respect them. And what I mean by that is, so if you look at this picture, there's 5 different individuals up here. If I were to ask you, just by looking at this photo, who in the picture is pregnant right now? Who in the picture was recently diagnosed with cancer and is undergoing chemo? Who in this picture just lost their dad? Who in this picture has ADHD? Who in this picture has autism? You can't tell by looking. Some disabilities are invisible. Some challenges are invisible. So when I say you have to respect it, what I mean is you're not going to be able to tell at first. A woman, when she's in her first trimester, you can't tell that she's pregnant usually. There aren't very many signs. There's nothing that's, she doesn't have a big bump yet. There's nothing, but she's already experiencing symptoms. Somebody who just started chemotherapy probably still has all of their hair. In fact, they may never lose it. And for many reasons, they might not want to tell you because it's a personal thing. The same is true when it comes to neurodiversity. I happen to be very public about my autism and ADHD, but so many others aren't, and they shouldn't have to be. We can be respectful and understand that people come from different perspectives and operate differently and find a way to work together. So, masking and translating. This goes into the communication piece. When you have autism, and remember we talked about not having strong social skills, feels like you're perpetually translating. The common nomenclature is masking, and it's encoding or translating verbal and nonverbal communication to the audience for understanding. So a lot of you on this call are doing this already. You are translating because English is not your first language. Or even if English is your first language, I'm probably using a lot of phrases that might be more American, and you're having to translate to what you think I actually mean. When you have autism, you can sit in your own community, wherever that is, speaking your native tongue, and still not communicate effectively with those around you. Part of the reason for that is our faces change perpetually. We have so many micro expressions. And so if somebody were to ask you, how do you feel? Most people would give the one word answer. I'm happy, I'm sad, I'm angry, I'm frustrated. In reality, you've probably never felt one emotion at a time. You usually feel multiple. I feel angry, I feel betrayed, I feel sad. You're going to feel all of those at the same time. Or, for example, let's say you just had a child, or you just bought a house, or you just got a promotion. You can be excited, you can be nervous, you can be sad that one chapter of your life is ending and a new one is beginning. You're going to feel multiple emotions. And when I look at your face and I see all of those, immensely overwhelming. And so there's a lot of translating that goes on for me to be able to communicate effectively for what you're expecting. So, of course, it couldn't be a mental talk if I didn't drop at least one more research study in it. So, social communication. This applies to everybody, whether you're neurodiverse or neurotypical. Often the senders and receivers, and this is specifically on scientific communication, but it very much applies to neurodiversity and neurotypicals, have different knowledge bases. While such communication is essential for solving the complex social and technological problems that affect multiple stakeholders, the diversity of knowledge among communicators can create representational gaps when senders make assumptions that receivers do not. Such conflict could, if managed, promote learning and innovation as communicators reconcile their assumptions. So these are assumptions that it's very interesting when you get a couple of autistic or neurodiverse people in the same room. We quickly realize we're making the same assumptions, and it's much easier for us to communicate with each other. It's not perfect, but it's easier. And when we do have a miscommunication, we tend to be very direct and bold with it and say, Oh, I thought you meant this. Oh, I thought you meant this. Nope, I meant this. Oh, okay. My apologies. And we move on. It's very quick. Whereas most people who are neurotypical follow the social protocols of whatever their culture is. We tend to bypass those. And so I have to translate it into what you're expecting. And then you respond back, and I have to again translate whatever you've said back into something that would make sense to me. I tend to use very formal language. I tend to use words that are very direct. I don't use a lot of um, analogies. I like to use real world examples because to me those make more sense and I don't have to try to infer what you're meaning. So connections are extremely important to people though. And so you could easily say, well, if communication is this hard, then does it really matter? It does. Human connections provide us with happiness, security, support, and a sense of purpose. Being connected to others is important for our mental and physical well being. So, how does somebody who has autism or another form of neurodiversity thrive in a world where it's more challenging? It's not just intuitive. How do you make those connections? Well, part of it is that respect. When we all respect that we're a little different, instead of taking the stance that I'm assuming that you're wrong or somebody's trying to be offensive, take the stance that they're coming from a place of care and understanding, and then ask clarifying questions. An example I love to use is the phrase, would you like to get coffee? This is one that once I learned that I had autism, I realized how frequently I said no to things that I didn't understand. If you asked me, Felicia, would you like coffee? My response was the same no matter what. No, thank you. I don't drink coffee. That was it. It didn't matter whether you were asking to get together to be friends, whether you were asking me out on a date, whether you were wanting to network, whether you needed to vent, or maybe you did just need coffee. It didn't matter. My answer was the same. What I've changed about that since is I now ask three questions, and it's always three: this, that, or something else. So, for example, today, if Kathleen had asked me, Felicia, would you like coffee? I would have said, no, thanks, but I do enjoy tea. Were you wanting to chat about the presentation, discuss Mensa, or something else? And then that would allow Kathleen to talk to me and say, oh, well, actually, I saw that you play piano and I wanted to discuss more about piano. Now I know exactly what she's asking me. And I can say, yes, that sounds delightful. I would love to. And we're on the same page. But before that, I don't want to say yes to something that I don't know. And I certainly don't want to say no to it because clearly she wasn't asking me about coffee. She was asking me something else. And you can do that with absolutely anything. Now, if you're on the other side, and let's say you're neurotypical and you asked somebody who's neurodiverse that, and they just come back with a straight answer and nothing else, and you feel like maybe they didn't understand what you were actually asking, you can do the same thing where you can say, oh, if I say I don't drink coffee, you can say, oh, well, actually, I was just wanting to chat about pianos and chat about your piano playing and this concert that's coming up. If that's something that would interest you, I'm sure we could find something, do you drink tea or something else? And so you're doing the same thing. You're just flipping it around and making it easier for me. And then I can go, oh, that's what you were actually asking. And again, now I can respond accordingly. So as we're thinking about connections, what creates connections? Remember we said previously, you've got to find at least common denominators. So there's things like relatable paths. If any of you have ever traveled, you know that if you're in your hometown, whomever lives closest to you is your best friend, right? Oh, we went to the same school together. Oh, we lived on the same street. Oh my goodness, you're absolutely connected because you're going to have so many more shared experiences. And then let's say you travel somewhere in your country. Now, all of a sudden, whoever lives in the same city as you, you're connected. When you leave your country and go to another country, if you find anybody who's from the same country as you, now you're connected because you have something in common. And so the more we travel around and the criteria keeps getting bigger and bigger of what counts as relatable. And we do that naturally. It can be a little harder the more and more you go. And so if we think back to the example of the man and woman on the previous slide, like I said, if you feel like you really can't find anything else, you can always bond over food, almost always. Other things that connect us are similar goals. So, for instance, a lot of us are in Mensa. We don't have anything else in common. We just all qualify as the top 2%. And what we want to do with that, we're here because we want to learn and grow today, specifically. Well, I'm also doing other Mensa things that I do just for fun. But right now, we all have a similar goal. Those shared experiences. So after this talk, we are all going to have a shared experience of having been here together today. And then there's the last one, that's symbiotic need. So my best friend actually has helped me with this a lot. They're neurotypical. And this is way before I found out that I was neurodiverse and had autism and ADHD. And they were somebody who never judged me. And I could go up to them and say, so and so did this, this, and this, and I don't get it. And they would walk me through what it likely meant and give me some suggestions of what I could say to figure out what it actually meant. And it got me through so many social situations. And sometimes it's just, I need your help, and maybe I can't help you. And maybe eventually down the line, I might be able to help you with something else. There's certainly been things over the years that I've helped him with that he's come to me and said, hey, I think you're the expert in this. Can you help me with X, Y, and Z? I'm like, oh, fabulous. I would love to. And no matter what, if you guys have ever been a mentor or a mentee, no matter which role you're in, you know you're always learning something. So, responsibilities. Remember, we all think differently, and that's a good thing. So, I want you to acknowledge differences. Just acknowledge that they exist. They're not good, they're not bad, they're just different. I want you to respect each other. We're all coming from different places, and you are not going to know everything about everyone. In fact, the version of you that exists in your mind, you are the only person who knows that person, because you are all of your thoughts and experiences combined, and you are the only person who is privy to that. The rest of us make it up. I can make assumptions about you because I have to. There's no way I can know everything about you. And so I'm going to have to make some assumptions that says, oh, if you're in Mensa, well, you must enjoy being around other smart people. Now, I could be wrong. Maybe you just want the card that says you're in Mensa and want nothing to do with the rest of us. That's possible. But I'm going to make an assumption. The part that's important about this when you are making those assumptions and you're respecting each other is when you get information that's contrary to your assumption, accept it and change what your assumption was. Recognize that you made an assumption. Do not be upset that you made one. Do not be upset that you were wrong. Just say, oh, I assumed this. Hey, that's interesting. I didn't know you like to cook. Hey, I didn't know you didn't like ice cream. Whatever that might be. Continue to learn more about yourself. The more you know about you, the more you're going to be able to understand other people and explain yourself to others and relate. And then whatever you do, continue to improve. So a few tools that might help, and this will help everybody, whether you're neurodiverse or not. Remember, communication requires intention, as no two individuals are alike. And specifically, when there's three or more people involved, you've got to tailor it to the least common denominator. So the first thing I want you to do is feel your feelings. Acknowledge your emotions. They may change, but are valid either way. And so when I say they may change, I'll give you an example. Let's say somebody steps on your foot. Okay, it hurts. You're in pain. You might even be angry at that person for being so clumsy as to injure you. Now, let's say 5 minutes later, you find out that the person who injured you was trying not to fall and they were catching a kid that was falling and they saved the kid's life. Well, now you're going to feel very different because you realize that it was an accident, not intentional. And if anything, they actually helped somebody else. Now, not only are you no longer angry at that person, you might feel bad about yourself for feeling angry at the person. Now, are any of those emotions wrong? No. Are any of them bad? No. Is it okay that they changed? Yes. But I want you to feel your feelings and just acknowledge them. They do not make up who you are, but they are a part of who you are. I want you to assess your perspective. So I talked about this a little bit previously. Apply an educated guess about a personality in someone's background. You can usually pick out pretty quickly whether someone's an introvert or an extrovert. You might be able to pick out pretty quickly, are they more thinking or feeling? So do they make more decisions based off of how they feel and think others would feel, or do they base them more off of logic? Or maybe it's a combination. Again, apply those guesses. And then 3, respectfully inquire. So ask open-ended questions, eliminating or multiple choice and other plus other option questions. So that's kind of the one that I talked about, where is it this, that, or something else? So resilience. Remember, diversity matters. When you are seen, heard, and understood, you feel safe and valued. Those who are psychologically safe make deeper connections with each other, igniting innovation as different perspectives collide. This builds bonds, friendships, sustainable happiness. Within Mensa, we could do anything in the world. We are going to work across people who are diverse, both in thought, culture, and everything. When we figure out how to do that in a safe way, and we must also be resilient to it, because people are going to do things that are not going to work well with my autism or ADHD, and I have to work through that. When we figure out a way to do that together, it's amazing what you can do. So one of the things that I do outside of my day job, and this is actually going to become my job full time, is I do autism diversity and leadership training. I think this is the same QR code from the beginning. So if you've already scanned it, you don't have to scan it again. And I will have it on the very last slide. So if anybody wants ample time to scan, you are welcome to. But I do work on transforming conflict and strife into innovation opportunities, specifically with corporations. And so part of that is learning how to navigate the neurotypical world. So I work directly with people who are neurodiverse and are struggling. Maybe you're doing well in your job, but want to do better or want to do more things, or you feel like you're underachieving. Help you achieve those goals. Identify the symbiotic need. And autism or asshole. This is a very interesting phrase, but it's so applicable because the intent behind it is what matters. And so I work with a lot of leaders who are leading diverse teams, and they say, "Hey, I've got this person, and they're just an absolute jerk." Well, are they, or is it something else? Are they struggling because they've got a migraine because you've got fluorescent lights everywhere and people are chitter chattering and they can't focus at all to the point that they are in physical pain? They're going to be grouchy about it. Yes. Does that make it okay? No. Does the leader and associate need to work together to figure out a better solution? Absolutely. But the first step is being aware, then it's respect and working through that. So I mentioned early on, I do have a book that's coming out in the spring of next year called There's a Fine Line Between Autism and Asshole, Unlocking the Potential of Adults on the Spectrum in the Workplace and at Home. And I'll leave you with this final thought before I open it up to questions. Is I want you to pause and I want you to assess where you are when it comes to individuals, whether it's who are neurodiverse or just diverse in general. So equality is everyone gets a pair of shoes. Diversity is everyone getting a different type of shoes. Equity is everybody getting a pair of shoes that fits. Acceptance is understanding we all wear different kinds of shoes. Belonging is wearing the shoes you want without fear of judgment. So thank you guys. I'm sure we probably have questions in the chat. I have not looked yet. Kathleen?
Oh, yes. You hear me, Felicia?
I can, yes.
Okay. We have several questions. And we also have several in the Q&A, and one person raised his hand. I'm going to start with a couple from the Q&A because they came earlier. So
Perfect.
we have somebody who I think is in Croatia. What does it mean that people lack the filter? You mentioned that early on. Do they actually remember more qualitatively, or do they just remember more things but in less detail?
Great question. So honestly, it depends on the individual. There are some individuals, and I would say this is much rarer, who have virtually a photographic memory and truly can remember almost everything. I do not fall under that category. Usually what it is instead of your brain filtering out and saying, here's the 7 things to focus on, you end up focusing on things that are irrelevant. So it could be something like, often I can walk into a room and tell you there's 4 different types of light sources in this room. It's not relevant. It doesn't help anybody to know that there's a couple of different light bulbs and sunshine coming in, or I can tell you how many outlets there are. Those are not useful pieces of information when it would be much more beneficial for me to tell you, oh, there were 5 people sitting in the room. I may have completely ignored that there were 5 people in the room. Um, so that's what I mean by the filter is you have to manually decide what you're going to be focused on. Good question.
Okay, thank you. Okay, now Timothy says, in the French show Astrid et Raphael, Astrid goes to an autism support group where they try to understand us, the neurotypicals.
Interesting. Although not entirely surprising. I will say there's been a lot of debate where those of us who are neurodiverse are often confused by why a neurotypical person would do something this way rather than that way. And what I would say is it's really kind of what your intuition is. And again, it's just how our brains work. So if you put it in the context of just think of anybody who works differently than you do. It could be you're in Mensa and they're not, or it could be maybe they're an engineer and you're an artist, and so your brains work very, very differently at how you look at a problem and assess it. And it's always a fun exercise just to try to understand somebody else's perspective and how they're getting there. I may need to look at that show, though. That sounds interesting.
Okay. Okay, so the next one is from Robert. He says, does the connectivity within the brain change over time? That is normal to start with, but either remove more or fewer connections as the person ages.
So now you're getting really deep into the neuroscience, and I will clarify, I'm not a neuroscientist. I do enjoy reading the papers. Um, there's normal connectivity that will change in the human brain, certainly. When we're saying that there's hyperconnectivity or underconnectivity, specifically in relation to autism, that's when they're doing brain scans to say that, if I'm measuring whether it's a 5-year-old, a 20-year-old, a 50-year-old, or a 70-year-old, if you're comparing them to the average, we're noticing that there is a quantifiable difference. So sort of like our IQs, we notice there's a quantifiable difference. As far as exactly what that difference is compared to the normal, I don't know offhand though, but good question.
Okay, thank you. We have one person who has raised his hand. Ron, I'm going to click on allow you to talk so that you can tell us what your question is. Can you talk now? Ask to unmute. Okay. Okay, Ron, can you talk? If not,
And
I will.
still showing he's muted. I don't know if you're able to unmute him.
I tried
Kathleen.
that. I put.
Oh, there we go.
There
Sorry.
we
Got a question about the, it seems like an increasing number of diagnoses of autism. Is it there's more people who are autistic, or just that more are getting deemed or classified as autistic?
The assumption is that more are being classified as autistic. One is when they switched it from just saying autism and Asperger's to turning it into a spectrum. That changed the criteria. There's also more people who now have resources to get tested. And then again, women and girls are now being tested for autism, even though we exhibit different signs and symptoms. So, for example, somebody else like me might actually be tested now as a child, but most people who meet me would not assume that I have autism because I'm so much better at masking it that they can't tell that my brain works differently. So that's why we believe
Great, thank
there's a
you.
rise in it. It's not that it's all of a sudden becoming more prevalent. It's that the criteria itself has changed.
Great, thank
Good
you.
question. Thanks, Ron.
Okay, I'll let you mute yourself again, Ron. Thank you. I'll move on to the Q&A box. Wendy is, I believe no, I won't guess. Okay, this is such a timely presentation for me. I was diagnosed as gifted as a child with depression and anxiety at age 23, bipolar depression at 45, and ADHD yesterday at 55. Happy birthday. Not necessarily your birthday. With each diagnosis, I've gone through a process of grieving of how my life could have been easier and what I've lost. Have you felt similar? And if so, how did you process the grief?
Great question, Wendy. And I think that's really important for people who've never had a diagnosis to understand. So yes, there is some grief that comes with that of, oh my gosh, I'm different. Wait, you mean other people just do this intuitively? They don't have to think, they just do it. So yes, there is certainly some grief that goes with that, but I would say flip it around instead and look at what makes you unique. Because when you start focusing on the good and the things that are easier for you compared to everyone else, and it's very easy for us to discount that because it is so easy. I can connect things that so many of my peers cannot, whether I'm at work or, um, you know, chatting with the, teachers at my son's school or whatever it is, somebody will do something. And I'm like, oh, well, this and this clearly and this, and I can pop out an answer very quickly. And to me, it just makes sense. And to them, it seems so daunting. There's no way that they could do it. And when you realize what your unique gifts and talents are, and that because of all those different things, like because of your ADHD, you can think and do things that nobody else can. And so, yes, you're going to have things that are tough. Yes, you're going to have things that are a struggle, and they're going to be a struggle because they look easy to somebody else. But you also have to remember that you're gifted, right? You've been gifted, you've got the Mensa test backing that. And that's going to make, you are already can do things that other people can't. So, yes, it comes with a lot. And certainly, if there's anything I can help with later on, please don't hesitate. By the way, anybody who's on this chat, feel free to contact me. You can go to my website or any of that. There's ways to contact me. Find me on LinkedIn or Facebook. Always happy to chat offline because I know we don't have a ton of time, but I want to get through as many questions as we possibly can. I think that's amazing that you shared that. And while I know you might still be grieving it, I'll also say congratulations for learning more about yourself.
Thank you. And Nicole has shared a diagram, and if anybody wants it afterwards, they can email me if you haven't written down the link. Okay, Dennis, do you know of any relationship between autism and dementia?
I do not, actually. I've not run across any study that links the two in any capacity.
Okay. And then Nicole has sent another study, which I will make available to anybody who asks me for it later. Ray, I haven't looked at this ahead of time. I've been learning about a diagnosis I have, a form of sleep apnea, and I've been finding out in scientific literature and personal observation that this is rather common in people both with ADHD and autism. I suspect the neurodiverse brain may be more sensitive to the sleep disruption effects of even mild sleep apnea, and this may be part of the person's overall experience. It may be an under-recognized factor that could be addressed, perhaps reducing some symptoms. My own ADHD symptoms vary widely according to my prior sleep quality, and I'm learning ways to treat the problem. Has this topic turned up on your radar?
Thanks for the question, Ray. So I like to look at, so yes, it has come up before, but I like to look at something like sleep apnea or struggling more with sleep as more of a symptom of neurodiversity rather than the cause. So if you look at the cause being, for example, if you have ADHD, you likely hyperfocus like crazy, or you may be more anxious than most people. And if that's true, then it's very easy to not have a stable sleep schedule. And so when you figure out how to create that stable sleep schedule and the consistent routine with it, that makes a big difference. So for example, with myself, I actually sleep trained myself to figure out exactly what it would take to fall asleep in 7.5 minutes. And I know that I need 7 hours, 21 minutes of sleep every night. That's the ideal amount of sleep. I'd love to say I did that as an adult. Nope, I did that way before I found out I had autism. I was like 9 or 10 when I went to do that because I got tired of being tired in the morning. And so learning how to figure out what's unique to your symptoms and saying, okay, this is a symptom, but track it back even further. What's likely the cause?
Okay, thank you. Sarge says, awesome presentation, thank you. Art Cartwright, are PTSD/PTSI considered a part of neurodiversity?
So remember, neurodiversity doesn't actually have a full definition. It's any divergence in how the brain works. So PTSD is post-traumatic post-traumatic stress disorder. Depending on who you are, yes, you may include that as part of neurodiversity because it does impact how the brain works. Um, although there's a lot of ambiguity around PTSD itself and how that truly impacts the brain and whether that's something that can be mitigated or ever corrected. Whereas most neurodiversity is something more that you are born with, or something that caused a lasting impact to your brain that you are not able to change. So I would say that one is kind of in debate which way it qualifies.
Okay. I'm not going to give you every question. I might come back to some if we have time. How's that?
Yes.
Natnucha, do you have a tip to for an 8-year-old boy with high functioning autism to connect with their friend? My child does not have any friend at school. He felt sad, but he don't know how to approach and start connect with other kids.
That's a really good question. Best advice, I actually have an 8-year-old son myself, is if you want to have a friend, be a friend. And so if you find somebody who needs help, is usually the best way to start to make a friend. And so, whether that's somebody who needs help with, I guarantee you there's somebody in his school that might need some help with reading or math, any topic, or maybe they're just out on the playground and there's nobody else sitting next to them. And so you just sit next to them and make it simple. You can even practice this with your son to talk through it and say, like, hi, my name's Felicia. What's your name? And then they'll say that, whatever their name is back. And if the other child doesn't immediately say something, you can say something like, my favorite dinosaur is this. What do you have a favorite dinosaur? And if they don't have one, then you can ask them, well, what's something you like? And you will find a connection, especially if you're already in school. It can definitely be a challenge, but having that script of exactly what to do and practicing it can really help remove some of that anxiety and make it easier. Good question.
Thank you. Okay, David, my daughter has ASD, and I'd like to know more about ASD. Do you have any suggestions?
There's a lot of suggestions. So I think the first thing is learning about autism in general. I would actually encourage you to just use the internet to start with, just learning what it means. They do split ASD or autism spectrum disorder into two categories. They tend to call it high functioning and low functioning. I'm not a fan of those two terms, but you can kind of think of it as low functioning tend to be nonverbal or minimal verbal, whereas higher functioning would be somebody more like myself, where it's less noticeable. We're obviously verbal. We can function more in society in a normal capacity. But just learning about it, there are tons and tons of books out there. I kind of wish I knew how old your child was, and I could give you some very specific suggestions. But I will try to share some out, and I would definitely say please reach out to me if you have more information. I can give you some specific links, because the other thing is, since this is an international talk, I know some websites are blocked depending on what country you're in. So I didn't provide any specifically for that reason.
Thank you. Okay, JD says, you had mentioned that one of the traits of autism is extreme honesty in almost all situations. You have also had success in the corporate world. How did you navigate potentially difficult situations related to honesty and integrity? Any tips would be welcome.
Good question. So actually in the business world, you tend to be much more cutthroat, for lack of a better phrase. You want to be very brutal. You tend to make decisions based more off of numbers rather than feelings. That said, though, you do still need to be mindful of whether it's your customers or your colleagues, that there are feelings and humans involved. So when you are honest, I think first thing that'll happen is your true character will show no matter what. So if you are a caring and compassionate person, you can be honest and still caring and compassionate. When you're in the corporate world, trying to move the feelings out of it. And so if somebody comes in and says, hey, we can't do this because of this, this, and this, instead of just telling them no, answering the actual question. And so if it says, well, if we do this, people aren't going to be able to change, like I do software. People aren't going to be able to change and adapt to this new software. It's going to take more time to do X, Y, Z. That's probably a valid reason. So let's listen to it and I'll say, well, what's the value we're getting? We'll do an assessment together. If you're worried about how the individual will feel about it, and well, this is too complicated for them, again, a valid query, and I should ask you more about that. So navigating the business world is actually almost easier when you're brutally honest. It's the personal world that gets a lot more difficult because it's very easy to walk into an argument, and whether it's with a a spouse, a parent, a child, sibling, whomever it might be, a really good friend, and if you want to argue facts and they're arguing emotions, you're not going to win, and you will absolutely come off looking like a jerk even though you're being very honest, and that can be bad. So also learning, just because it's true doesn't mean you need to say it. It's probably the last piece I would tell you.
That's wise. Jenny is asking, what's it like being a neurodivergent person in Mensa?
A lot of fun. There's a lot more neurodivergent people in Mensa than I would say there are in normal society, or maybe I'll say we're a little bit more vocal about it. So it's easier to find other individuals who are neurodiverse. I've also noticed most Mensans tend to be a little bit more accepting of our differences. And that's just because, again, the only thing we have in common is our IQ. And so many of the quirks that I would say come with autism, a lot of people may just brush off as, oh, well, that's because she's from Kansas, or that's because she works in this industry, or whatever. And even if they do find out it's from autism or ADHD, there's still usually more understanding that goes with it. And if there isn't, most Mensans seem to be pretty fine if I'm like, oh, we're just not going to get along, and we just go our separate ways, and it works. So I'd say it's been very helpful.
Okay. Now somebody has raised their hand. While I'm looking for that one, I'll give you Elka's question. I have the ability to literally step outside of myself and analyze my situation coldly and analytically, and then actually act on the objective decision. Nobody I know about can do this. Does this ability have a name? I'm going to take a gander here and say it's perspective taking. What do you think, Felicia?
I would go with the same thing. I don't know that there's a specific, I don't think there's a medical term for it, but that is ideally what most people should be doing. I would say I definitely do that all the time, where I kind of step outside and almost look at it as though you were somebody from the outside, or looking into the life and saying like, okay, this makes sense, and look at all the different people and go, oh, that makes sense. So I think that's great that you're able to do that.
Okay, so I'm allowing Timothy to talk. So Timothy, go ahead.
Oh, good morning. Thank you very much, Kathleen and Felicia. I worked with a woman who had an autistic son, and I'm somewhat friendly with another woman who has an autistic son. And it seemed to me that as they got older, from middle teens to late teens, that for one of a more direct way of putting it, they seemed to be more difficult to control. The woman I worked with would spend a fair amount of her time at work saying, no, Nathan, no, you can't do that. No, listen to me, Nathan. The other thing that went along with it was that, and I'm sorry I've forgotten her name, it was a long time ago, but she also had to consider what's going to happen to her son after she was dead, that she needed something like a conservator for him. And that's been my experience, such as it is with people who have autistic sons.
So yeah, what you're referring to, Timothy, is those who we would say are on the lower functioning side of the spectrum. And it is certainly possible that there is degradation over time. There is a treatment out there that's called ABA, Applied Behavioral. I was going to say analytics, but that's not the correct word. But
Analysis.
analysis, thank you. So it's ABA, and there was a lot of debate among the autistic community whether that's a good thing or not, because basically what you're doing is you're teaching a child how to mask, and you're telling them you have to do it this way, whether it's intuitive or not. And I will say that it is certainly, in some cases, it is physically painful to do things. So for example, I can wear attire that has a couple of different textures, but a lot of times I will wear a one-piece outfit or something that only has 2 or 3 pieces of fabric or things touching me because I can't filter out anymore before it starts to drive me nuts. And there are certain articles of clothing that I don't care if it's fashionable or not. I can't do it. And I used to throw kicking, screaming fits with my mother when I was a child because I was like, it hurts. It hurts. She's like, it shouldn't hurt. They're just tights or whatever it was, right? Nothing. She wasn't putting me in anything abnormal that a normal child wouldn't wear. But to me, it physically hurt. And so I would say in the examples that you provided with the limited info you shared, I would say it's very possible that either situations or circumstances had changed that made that more challenging. And certainly, if you are the parent or caregiver that goes with that, it will wear you down. It takes a lot of effort. And if you aren't understanding why your child is struggling with something, it makes it harder. For example, changing soaps. This sounds very simplistic. And even if it's the same brand of soap, let's say that the company that puts out, whether it's lotion or your hand soap or your body wash, that they have somehow changed their formula. We can pick up on the changes, whether it's a chemical change, whether it's an aromatic change, whatever it is. And it can be enough that it causes physical pain. It can cause migraines. There's many different symptoms that go with it. And so if you think about yourself when you're feeling sick, physically ill, and how much grouchier you become, now imagine that you felt that way every day, over and over and over again. And I would bet over time, it would seem like you're getting worse. So I would say in most cases, they're probably not getting worse. It's just their ability to cope continues to decline. And if the situation continues to change, which it does, most people just don't recognize what the minute changes are, that can impact it. There's also a possibility that they may have had co-occurring symptoms. A lot of children and adults who have lower functioning autism tend to have other issues like seizures. Some of them can be micro seizures and they don't even pick up on them for decades later. And that's causing the children significant trauma until they finally get diagnosis for them. So, I mean, obviously I can't tell you the exact reason in the situations you shared, Timothy, but hopefully that gives at least some perspective as to why that might be occurring.
Thank you. Okay, George. Great talk. Question. Why do we consider our condition a handicap? Whereas many of us not only enjoy our kind of, quote, insanity, but consider our neurodiverse traits as superpowers. Seriously, why the victim attitude?
I will say part of that is personal preference, but I would also say most people who advocated originally for autism and neurodiversity were the parents and caregivers. The rest of us who could get through it were never diagnosed. And so it's coming from the place of parents and caregivers where it is a handicap, where it is stopping them from doing things. And it's, much more intense and they're dealing with co-occurring diagnoses that are extremely challenging. Out of just the stories that you've heard from the questions in this, Q&A today, there's been various stories of how people feel about their autism, ADHD, whatever that might be. And so I would say we need to be mindful that in some cases it absolutely is a handicap. And in other cases, for people like myself, and it sounds like for you, it definitely feels like a superpower. But if you remember when I was sharing about just diversity in general, right? You could be an extremely tall individual, and then that makes you really talented at some sport. By the same token, if you look at the tallest man in the world, he has to use crutches and his body physically can't hold himself up, and he's in extreme amounts of pain. And so being tall by itself is not a good or a bad thing, but in some places it really is a handicap. And so I think just keeping that in mind and being respectful of everybody. And in your case, you could certainly say, hey, it's not a handicap, but I realize how it can be for some.
And Vedran is responding to George and everybody. He says, I can offer my perspective. That might be true about being a victim for many of you, and I'm honestly glad for you, but many of us face real problems such as unfairness, judging, and social problems such as unfairness, judging and social problems, doing things that neurotypicals find completely effortless. I know I'm not a victim in a sense that anybody else hurt me intentionally, but it surely is a handicap. So he's basically being supportive.
Good comment.
Yeah. And then George also offers, I think, I'm not sure, that research in the UK had studies that PTSD incidents are not only more frequent in neurodiverse people, but also when the PTSD does happen, they're even more devastating in depth and impact.
I may have to look that up. Thanks for sharing.
Okay, and then George says, great answer, thanks. And JD, I haven't read this yet, I hope this is good. Thank you for responding to my prior question about honesty and integrity in the corporate world, especially if you are on the autistic spectrum. The intent of my question was more about how to deal with people who may be insincere or dishonest, but may have more power than you in a given situation. Namely, how to continue to be a valuable player and contribute to the firm's success while also being your true self and being honest without becoming alienated and discounted by a toxic culture.
Oh, thanks for the clarity on that question. And I absolutely understand where you're coming from. I would say part of this is learning to pick your battles. Of, is something where you feel like they're being insincere or dishonest. Sometimes they're doing it intentionally, sometimes they're not. For example, it could be a leader who they may have information on, who a vendor is that you're going to do a contract with, but they're not at liberty to discuss because they don't want anybody to know who the top 3 contenders are, because that would create unfair potential favoritism and sway things in a way it shouldn't. So you do have to be very mindful of that. The other piece that I would be kind of caution you on is also, does it particularly matter? Because remember, people are also coming at things from different perspectives. So it's very possible that when somebody approaches and it sounds like they're being insincere or dishonest, from their perspective, they might not be. And that can be tough to recognize that they feel like they're being sincere and honest, and you absolutely feel like they're not. To make sure that you're still a valuable player and contribute, I'd say first determine, is it something that's worth pursuing at all? And does it add any value? And then pose the question. So instead of ignoring it or just flat out telling somebody you're wrong, I would start with asking them to clarify more and say, hey, I'm a little confused by XYZ. Can you share a little bit more about that? We'll have to go into it further. And then, if you do have an idea or you feel like something is harmful, I have absolutely gone up to people and said, hey, this software is not about to be released. We cannot release this and move forward. This is going to cause problems. And I remember having my direct leader tell me once, and they said, are you willing to stake your career on it? And I guess that's the same question I would pose to you. Do you feel like it is worth that much? And do you feel like you are that right and you can prove it? If you do, and you have to do it respectfully, then go for it. I absolutely did in that case. And I stopped something that was one of the top 12 things that had to be in by end of year per firm timeline, if you will. And I don't work for a small company. We have well over 50,000 associates that work for us. And so when I said this is not going in, it was a very big decision that I said, we're not doing it. And it went up the chain of command, and it was the right choice. And people remembered me because of it. And then they started trusting me more in future meetings. But I will say my job was absolutely on the line, that if I was wrong, I had to be willing to die on that hill. So use that with caution.
And George adds, you can answer that. Learn about whistleblower rights, he says. Yeah.
Well, and I would say I did answer the question a little more generically because I know rights and employee rights vary from country to country. So I was trying very carefully not to answer any question just within the context of American business culture, because rights vary all around the world.
Okay. Rani says, thank you for this talk, which was fascinating and enlightening. I will definitely look out for your book. And JD says, thank you. I like the idea of pick your battles. Okay, now, do you have any time for any more? Or because we're at 20 after 3 already.
I was going to say, I think we probably need to wrap up, and anybody else has questions, like I said, please do not hesitate to connect up with me on, whether it's Facebook or LinkedIn, or you guys are in Muncie, you're welcome to email me as well. Always happy to continue conversations offline.
Okay, well, I just want to say. So, Felicia Davis, on behalf of Toronto Mensa, please accept our thanks for your fascinating presentation, very comprehensive and very articulate. And as a sign of our appreciation, we will be sending you a small gift.
Well, thank you so much for hosting me today, Kathleen. I really appreciated it, and I love getting to share and hopefully help more people, because that's always important. So I absolutely love that you host these, and I love being an attendee myself. So it's a great honor that I was able to present today. So thank you very much.
It was great having you.
And thank you to everybody who attended as well. I know some of you are on and it is already Monday morning and got on really early based off of where you are in the country. So, or in the world, I should say, excuse me. So thank you guys very much.
You're getting a lot of floating emojis coming up, loves and claps and everything else. It's wonderful. So thank you, Felicia, and thank you to the audience. You're a great audience. There were a lot of you. It was nice. And I really loved all the questions. So thank you very much, everyone. We'll end here. Bye for now.